A week into the worst winter Wyoming had ever seen, a man stepped out of his freezing cabin and found children playing barefoot in the snow. They weren't crying, they weren't running, they were laughing, and they weren't coming from a house. They were climbing out of a hole in the ground. For months earlier, no one in Wind River Basin was laughing at Mara Voss. They didn't laugh, because they had already decided how her story would end. A widow, 2 small children, a cabin that couldn't hold heat even in late summer, and a winter coming that didn't forgive mistakes. They didn't need to say it out loud. Everyone knew. She wasn't going to make it. The cabin stood crooked against the open land, its seams already splitting, its walls breathing with every shift of wind. Even in August, the air found its way inside. At night, Mara lay awake, listening, not to silence, but to the wind learning her home, testing it, tracing it, finding every weakness. Winter here didn't arrive. It waited, just beneath the ground, like something patient and hungry. Her husband, Elias, had been dead for 112 days. No warning, no last words, just a collapse, and a body carried back in silence. He left her 40 acres of stubborn land, more rock than soil, a woodpile that would not last 2 months, and a cast iron stove that burned like a starving animal. Feed it, or freeze. There was no middle ground. Mara had already done the math. Late at night, a dull pencil scratching across scrap wood, counting logs, counting hours, counting how long before the cold took everything. She ran the numbers again, and again, and again. It didn't change. No matter how carefully she stretched it, they did not survive the winter. The town saw it too. They just didn't say it the same way. Men like Arthur Hale would stand at a distance, arms folded, studying her cabin like it was already a ruin. The women brought bread, soft voices, gentle eyes that stayed just a second too long on her children. Caleb, 8 years old. Lena, barely 6. Too young to understand why people looked at them like that, like they were already gone. Mara accepted the bread, but not the pity. Pity was a kind of surrender, and she wasn't ready to surrender anything. It was near sunset when she stood in front of the cellar, half buried into the slope behind the cabin. A heavy oak door bound with iron, dark, sealed, untouched. Elias had never opened it. The previous owner had called it wrong, drafty, useless, not worth the trouble. So it stayed closed, like a question no one wanted answered. Mara didn't see a problem. She saw something that had already survived longer than anything else on that land. Stone walls, deep foundation, anchored into the earth, not fighting the wind, ignoring it. The lock was thick, rusted, stubborn. She didn't rush it. An iron bar, a small stone beneath it. She leaned her weight slowly. Not strength. Leverage. The metal groaned, strained, then snapped. The door opened inward, dragging against the earth. And something breathed out. Not wind. Not surface cold. Something deeper. Still, heavy, old. And faintly, it smelled like salt. Stay behind me. Caleb and Lena pressed close as she lifted the lantern and stepped inside. The light pushed forward, revealing stone. Not rough. Not broken. Placed. Measured. Intentional. The room was larger than it should have been. Wide, square. The floor laid in thick, flat stone. At the far end, a narrow opening cut into the wall, leading into darkness that swallowed the light. And along one side, 3 wooden chests. Old. Sea-worn. Out of place. Mara stepped closer. The air moved here. Barely enough to see, but enough to touch the flame. Not trapped. Circulating. She opened the first chest. Tools. Not farm tools. Not mining tools. Precision tools. Curved blades. Augers. Planes worn smooth by careful hands. The second chest held rope, canvas, blocks and pulleys. Ship equipment. Hundreds of miles from the ocean. Her hands slowed at the third. Inside. Leather-bound journals. Dozens of them. Stacked carefully. Preserved. Waiting. She opened one. Tight handwriting. Dense diagrams. Measurements layered over every page. Half in a language she barely knew, half in technical English. Not stories. Instructions. She turned a page, then another. Her breathing changed. The children shifted behind her, feeling it, even if they didn't understand it. These weren't notes. They were systems. Airflow. Heat movement. Stone structures designed to hold something invisible. Then she saw it. A firebox, small, but connected to something beneath it. Lines. Curving. Turning. Running under the floor. Back and forth, again and again. A path for heat. Not escaping. Staying. Mara slowly lifted her head. Her eyes moved across the stone floor beneath her feet. The walls pressed deep into the earth. The narrow passage disappearing into darkness. This wasn't a cellar. Above them, the wind moved across the land, slipping through the cracks of a house that would never survive it. Mara closed the journal. Her grip tightened. We're not staying in the cabin. A moment passed. We're moving down here. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, Mara began to dig. Not outside, not a new cellar, beneath her own feet. She started with the floor. The flagstones were thick, heavy, set with care by hands long gone. It took both strength and patience to lift the first one. An iron bar wedged beneath the edge. A slow shift of weight, stone grinding against stone. Then finally, it moved. Beneath it, packed earth, dense, unforgiving, but not frozen. Not yet. Caleb carried the first bucket of dirt out with both arms shaking. Lena followed behind him, smaller, slower, refusing to be left out. They didn't understand the plan, but they understood her certainty, and that was enough. By midday, the cellar floor was no longer flat. It was broken, opened, cut into narrow trenches that twisted across the space like something alive. Not random, measured, every turn, every angle, pulled directly from the pages she had read the night before. Her hands blistered quickly, then broke, then hardened. Each shovel of earth felt like defiance. Against the cold, against the town, against the quiet expectation that she would fail. By the third day, someone noticed. Arthur Hale arrived without knocking, boots heavy on the slope, shadow filling the doorway before his voice came. "What are you doing down there?" Mara didn't look up right away. She finished packing the bucket, set it aside, then turned. Improving it. Arthur stepped inside, his eyes adjusting slowly to the dim light. What he saw made him stop. The floor was no longer a floor. It was a network. Deep cuts running in long, winding paths, stone pulled up, earth exposed. A pattern that made no sense to him. "This isn't improvement," he said. "This is a mistake." He stepped closer, boots thudding against the remaining stone. "You should be sealing your cabin, cutting wood, preparing like everyone else." Mara wiped her hands on her skirt. "There won't be enough wood." Arthur let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "There's never enough wood. That's why we work harder." Harder won't change the math. He stared at her. For a moment, something sharper moved behind his eyes. Not anger, disbelief. "You're digging under your own shelter," he said. "You're weakening it." He gestured toward the trenches. "And when you light a fire down here," a pause, "you'll fill this place with smoke. You'll choke before the cold ever gets to you." The words hung in the air, heavy, certain. Behind Mara, Lena had stopped moving, her small hands gripping the edge of a bucket, listening. Mara didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. "I'm not trapping the smoke." A breath. "I'm slowing it down." Arthur frowned. That answer meant nothing to him. Less than nothing. "You're gambling with your children's lives." Now she looked at him fully, not defensive, not uncertain. "So is everyone else." Silence. The wind moved faintly across the hill above them, a low, distant sound, like something waiting its turn. Arthur shook his head slowly. "I've built every proper structure in this valley," he said. "I know how heat works." A pause. "You're digging a grave." Mara held his gaze. "A grave is cold." A beat. "This won't be." Something in her tone, not loud, not forceful, just certain, made him hesitate. But only for a moment. "This is foolishness," he said finally. "You don't have time for this. First snow comes early this year, you know that." He stepped back toward the door. "If this fails, the town will have to clean up what's left." He left without another word. By evening, the story had already spread. They didn't whisper anymore. Not like before. Now they spoke openly. At the well. At the store. The Danish widow, digging her family into the ground. Some called it desperation. Others called it madness. A few called it what they truly believed. A death sentence. Mara heard it all. Every word carried easily in a place like that. But down in the cellar, the noise didn't matter. There was only the work. She found clay near the creek bed, hauled it back in heavy loads, mixed it by hand with sand and water until it held together. Stone by stone, she lined the trenches. Flattened rock fitted tightly along the walls, sealed with clay, closing the channels into something hidden. A path beneath the floor, invisible once covered. The firebox came last. She built it in the far corner, thick granite blocks, set tight, lined carefully with clay that could take the heat. Every angle mattered. Every gap was a risk. If the system failed, Arthur would be right. And right now, that was the most dangerous thing of all. By the time the first frost touched the ground, her hands no longer bled. They had hardened into something else. Something that didn't hesitate. The trenches were sealed. The stone floor was laid back into place, piece by piece, until the room looked whole again. As if nothing had changed. But beneath it, everything had. Mara stood in the center of the cellar, the journal open in her hands. The final diagram resting under the lantern light. One fire, fast, hot. Then nothing. She closed the book slowly. Above them, the wind had changed. Stronger now, sharper. Winter wasn't waiting anymore. It was coming. Mara looked at the firebox, then at her children, then back at the stone beneath her feet. Tomorrow, she would light it. The fire caught faster than she expected. Dry aspen, split thin, stacked carefully. One strike, then another. A small flame, then suddenly, a clean, rising roar. Mara stepped back, watching. Not the fire itself, but what it did next. The heat pushed forward, then vanished. Not into the room, not into the air, into the floor. For a moment, nothing changed. The stones beneath her feet stayed cold. The air stayed still. The fire burned hard, fast. And then, began to fade. Doubt came quickly, sharp, immediate. Had she misunderstood it? Had she built it wrong? Behind her, Caleb shifted closer. Is it supposed to do that? Mara didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the firebox, on the last of the flames folding in on themselves, turning to glowing coals, then ash. It takes time, she said finally. The stone has to learn it. They waited. Minutes passed. Then more. Mara knelt slowly, placing her hand flat against the floor. Cold. Still cold. Her breath caught. Just slightly. Then, something shifted. Not heat. Not yet. The absence of cold. So subtle she almost pulled her hand away too soon. But she stayed. Another minute, and there it was. A faint warmth, rising slowly, spreading outward from beneath the stone. Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. By evening, the change was undeniable. The entire floor held it. Not hot, not sharp. Steady. Even. Lena sat down first, hesitant, then fully, then barefoot. Her face changed. Not surprise. Not confusion. Relief. It's warm, she whispered. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. Not a grave. A shelter. That night, for the first time since Elias died, they slept without waking to the cold. 3 days later, they moved everything down. 2 beds. A small table. The journals. What little food they had left. The cabin above was left behind, empty, already losing the battle it had never been built to win. Below the ground, life became quiet. Mornings began with a single fire. Small. Fast. Gone within the hour. But the warmth stayed. Not in the air, in the stone. In the walls. In the ground itself. By midday, the cellar held a steady comfort that didn't shift, didn't flicker, didn't demand more fuel. No smoke. No draft. No constant feeding of the flame. Just warmth that stayed. Above them, the wind began to change. It came sharper now, less forgiving, cutting across the open land with a sound that no longer whispered. It warned. The first snow fell in early November. Not heavy, but sudden. The town reacted the way it always did. Wood piles were dragged closer to doors. Stoves burned longer, hotter, cabins sealed as tightly as hands could manage. Inside those cabins, fires roared. And still, the cold found its way in. It slipped through the cracks, under doors, between boards that had shifted just enough to fail. People huddled closer to their stoves, faces burning, backs freezing, feeding the fire. Again, and again, and again. The wood disappeared faster than it should have. But no one said it out loud. Not yet. Down in the cellar, Mara lit the morning fire. It burned clean. Short. Intense. Then it was gone. Caleb sat on the floor, carving a small piece of wood with careful hands. Lena lay on her stomach nearby, drawing shapes into the faint warmth of the stone with her finger. No one shivered. No one rushed to the fire. There was no fire left to rush to. Only the warmth it had left behind. Days passed. Then weeks. The cold deepened. The kind that settled into the ground. Into the bones of the land itself. In town, people began to notice something strange. Mara's chimney. Barely smoked. Just a thin, pale breath in the morning. Then nothing for the rest of the day. Too little. Far too little. They assumed it meant one thing. She was running out of wood. Arthur Hale heard it first at the store. A quiet remark. Passed between 2 men trying not to say it too directly. She won't last the month. Arthur didn't respond. But the thought stayed with him. At night, as he fed his own fire again. And again. Watching his woodpile shrink faster than it should. He found himself thinking about the cellar. About the trenches. About the way she had said it. I'm slowing it down. He pushed the thought away. Above ground. Winter was tightening its grip. Below it, Mara placed her hand against the floor. feeling the steady warmth rise beneath her palm. It was working, but winter wasn't finished yet. The storm didn't begin with snow. It began with silence. One morning, the wind stopped. Completely. No movement across the basin. No sound along the ridge. Just a stillness that pressed against the land like something holding its breath. Mara felt it before she saw it. Standing outside the cellar, a bucket in her hand, she looked up at the sky. Flat. Colorless. Too heavy. Inside, she said. By noon, the world disappeared. Not snow falling, but the air itself turning white. The storm came down all at once. A wall. Wind returned without warning. Not as a gust, but as a force that did not stop. It screamed across the land, dragging ice and powder so fine it moved like smoke. Erasing distance. Erasing direction. Erasing everything. Above ground, doors were barred. Windows covered. Stoves pushed to their limit. Inside Arthur Hale's cabin, the fire burned hotter than it ever had. The iron stove glowed dull red. Wood stacked beside it, then dragged closer, then fed in faster than it could be cut. Still, the cold came in. It slipped through every seam, every joint, finding paths no builder could fully close. Arthur stood near the stove, one side of his face burning, the other already cold. Across the room, a cup of water froze solid. His son coughed again, dry at first, then deeper, heavier. Arthur turned, watching him, listening to the sound settle into his chest. Too fast. He fed another log into the fire, then another. The draft pulled hard, dragging heat up the chimney, pulling more cold air into the room to replace it. A fight he could not win. Hours passed, then night, then another day. The storm did not weaken. It intensified. Temperatures dropped further. 20 below, then 30, then lower. Wood disappeared. Not slowly, not predictably. Vanishing, faster than reason allowed. Arthur opened the door once, just enough to look outside. The wind struck him like a solid thing. Breath stolen instantly. Vision gone in white. He slammed it shut, hands shaking. Inside, the cabin felt smaller, colder. His son coughed again, this time, wet. Arthur froze. That sound meant something different, something worse. He looked at the woodpile. What remained? Not enough, not even close. For the first time in years, certainty left him, and something else took its place. Fear. Below the storm, the world was different. No wind, no noise, only the quiet weight of the earth. Mara lit the morning fire. Small, measured. It burned quickly, bright, then disappeared into the system she had built. The floor held it. Warmth spread slowly, evenly, through stone and soil. Caleb sat near the wall, reading from one of the journals in careful pieces. Lena lay beside him, listening, half asleep, her cheek pressed against the warm floor. No one rushed the fire. There was no fire left to rush, only what it had become. Time moved differently here. Hours passed without tension, without counting. Above them, the storm raged without pause. Below it, they lived. On the 5th day, Arthur stopped feeding the fire. Not by choice, because there was nothing left to burn. The stove cooled, slowly at first, then all at once. The cold filled the space immediately. His breath thickened in the air. The walls began to frost from the inside. His son's coughing worsened, each breath shorter, more strained. Arthur stood in the center of the room, hands at his sides, unable to move for a moment. Everything he had built, everything he understood, had failed him. Then a thought returned, unwanted, unreasonable. The widow, Mara Voss. He had dismissed it, mocked it. But now, it was the only thing left. If she was alive. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Arthur wrapped himself in every layer he owned, opened the door, and stepped into the storm. The cold hit like a blade. Snow rose around him immediately, waist deep, then higher, each step a fight. He couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Couldn't tell direction from distance. Only memory guided him. Step. Pause. Breathe. Again. The wind pushed him sideways, dragged at his legs, filled his mouth when he tried to breathe. Minutes stretched into something longer. His body slowed. His thoughts dulled. Then, through the white, something broke the pattern. A shape, low, half buried in drift. He stumbled forward. A ridge, a slope, the cellar. Then he saw it. Not smoke. Heat. A faint distortion in the air above a short stone chimney, barely visible, but undeniable. Arthur stopped. His mind struggled to accept it. Then something else. Footprints. Small, light. Children's tracks, pressed into the snow, fresh. Leading to the door. And back again. Arthur's breath caught. Impossible. He forced himself forward, each step heavier than the last. Reached the door. Half buried. Raised his hand, and knocked. Once. Then again. The sound was dull against the wood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the latch shifted. And the door opened. The door opened, and warmth touched his face. Not heat. Not the sharp blast of a fire pushed too hard. Something gentler. Steady. Deep. Arthur didn't move at first. He just stood there, feeling it. After days of cold that cut through bone, this felt unreal. Mara stood in the doorway. Her expression calm, unchanged, as if the storm above them belonged to another world. Behind her, he saw them. Caleb, sitting on the floor, carving quietly. Lena, lying beside him, barefoot. Barefoot. Arthur stepped inside without asking. The door closed behind him, and the storm vanished. No wind, no sound, no fight. Just warmth. He stood there, trying to understand it. The air didn't burn his lungs, didn't dry his throat. It didn't feel like heat from a stove. It felt like the room itself was warm. Arthur knelt slowly, pulling off his glove with stiff fingers, placing his hand against the stone floor. He froze. It was warm, not hot. Not uneven. Everywhere. He pressed his palm flat, as if trying to prove it wrong. Then he stood, walked to the wall, placed his hand there too. The same. The heat wasn't coming from a place. It was inside the structure itself. Arthur turned back to her. Everything he knew, every rule he had trusted, had just broken. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Only one word. How? Mara didn't smile. Didn't correct him. Didn't remind him of what he had said before. She looked past him, as if she could still see the storm above them. The stone remembers, she said. Arthur said nothing. The fire is quick, she continued, but the heat doesn't have to be. She walked past him, reached for a loaf resting on the table, still warm. Pressed it into his hands. You have no wood left, she said. Not a question. Arthur swallowed. Nodded once. She turned to Caleb. Get the sled. The boy didn't hesitate. Minutes later, they were outside again. The storm had weakened, but the cold remained. They loaded the sled in silence. Carefully stacked pieces of hardwood, seasoned, dry, enough to matter. Arthur watched her as she worked. This wasn't survival. This was control. When it was done, she stepped back. Burn it fast, she said, not all day. He frowned slightly. Let the heat stay, she added, don't chase it out. He didn't fully understand. But he listened. Because now,
He had no reason not to. The storm broke 2 days later. The sky cleared, revealing a world buried under layers of white. Fences disappeared, paths erased. And silence settled over everything. In the days that followed, stories spread. Some homes had barely held. Others hadn't. Wood piles were gone, animals lost.
In quieter voices now. Less certain. And always, the same story returned. The widow in the ground. Arthur was the one who told it differently. Not as rumor. Not as warning. As truth. He returned to her cellar days later. Not as a builder. As a student. He brought tools. Measurements. Questions he no longer tried to hide. Together, they rebuilt the idea. Not just cellars. Homes. Stone at the center. Heat held beneath the floor. Fires burned fast, but remembered longer. The design spread quietly. From one house, to another. Then across the basin. People learned to stop fighting the cold. And start working with it. Years passed. Children grew. Cabins changed. But in every home that followed her design, there was a moment, late at night, when someone would place their hand on the floor. And feel it. Not fire. Memory. Of heat that stayed. Of a winter that didn't win. And of a woman who refused to burn everything just to survive one more night.